Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're very excited to have you. My name is Pam Coca. I am the Director of Colleague Experience and Technology at VMware. I am specifically responsible for supporting our VMware colleagues in the Americas. And we also have with us my colleague, Dave Burton, who is my counterpart in the EMEA region. And so we're very excited today to be talking to you on this, what I would say has been a very popular topic, which is how we as VMware IT have enabled our workforce to be able to work securely and remotely. And for the most part, actually, we did a lot of this work pre-pandemic, but we're also going to talk today, not only how we enabled folks, but how we adapted during the pandemic to make sure that there was a seamless transition. And then we're also going to touch a little bit on, some of the things that we're thinking about in terms of what the future of work post-pandemic may look like. And so here's a really high-level agenda for you, but I am going to pass it over to Dave to kick us off.
Hey, thanks, Pam, and welcome everyone. It's great to have you here. So before we kind of jump into some of the main content, I just wanted to give you a bit of a flavor about when we knew the pandemic was coming, what we did to get ready for it. And you can see on the slide, I'm going to focus on some of the points. So the first thing we knew was that obviously with our offices closing over a single weekend pretty much globally, we knew that our remote service desk volumes were going to increase and go up. So rather than actually hire new people on our service desk in Bangalore, we actually supplemented it with regional teams. So people from my own team in EMEA, from Pam's team in Americas, and from the Asia Pac team as well. We actually expanded our service desk support using our own teams. So on Friday, our teams, one of my team in Paris was actually taking French calls, and actually on the following Monday, he was taking a call from South Korea, which was pretty cool. So that was one thing we did. Monitoring, we knew that we needed to monitor our services very critically because people were relying on them to work remotely. So we set up a very quick dashboard to monitor all of our critical services, especially kind of key remote working tools like video, VPN, etc. VDI, our virtual desktop infrastructure, we expanded the capacity on actually, and I think I was personally surprised that our actual adoption, our usage internally rather, increased by about 70% since March on our people using our virtual desktop infrastructure. So that was a surprise for me, but I'm glad we actually obviously increased the burst capacity on AWS and Horizon View to do that in advance. VPN, we haven't got to use the VPN internally, but we still do. It gives a good experience in terms of being always on when you first log onto your machine. We increased capacity there. And lastly, we knew that people might not have had time to kind of take stuff from home that they needed to work from home. So they might not have monitors from home. They might not have had a chance to collect their headsets or docking stations or keyboards or mice. So we quickly worked with our sourcing team to come up with a catalogue of things that people could use to work from home. And then we worked with our suppliers to ring fence supplies so we could get those supplies to them quickly and make sure they were available to us. So that's what we did the pre-pandemic, and then kind of jumping in, this is what we did actually when the pandemic hit. And I think the key point I want to land here is that although this is what we did as part of the COVID pandemic, this actually could be used for any business resiliency scenario, but also this is the way we've been working for the last kind of 2 years, really. It's been a journey to get here. So even before the pandemic hit, we were doing these things. So the first one is around how do we enable our colleagues to work? And we do that in 3 primary ways. So every colleague internally in VMware is eligible for a laptop. So we give them a corporate issued machine, which is the primary way. You can use a personal device. I'm talking to you on a personal computer now from home. It's my personal choice, and many of our colleagues choose to do that. Or we've got really cool vending machines internally, actually. So actually you can go up to a vending machine, you can take a laptop, and then actually out of the machine, you can configure the machine in front of you without any interference or any need from someone from IT, and it fully configures the machine and you're ready to go. And then when you're finished with it, you just take it back and put it back into the machine again, and it wipes it just back to the next person. The other really cool thing, and this sounds like a simple thing, is Workspace ONE. So it's one of our own products we love, but we have the ability to access Workspace ONE from anywhere we are. So we have a login.vmware.com, and that can be accessed from any device, any location, anywhere you may be in the world. And that's really cool because it's very rare for many companies. Actually, you can get access to all of your documents, all of your data, all of your key applications, all in one place, all in one go. So that's something which we utilised a lot. Our tunnel, so our works with one tunnel, again, a simple point in terms of kind of saying it, but a hell of a lot of work to get there. We have one tunnel, so no matter what device you're using, as long as it's managed, you can get to any single resource or website internally in VMware. So whether that might be a HR policy, an expenses claim, whatever it might be, you can get to every single website, no matter what device we're using it from, provided it's managed by Workspace ONE. And then, of course, I mentioned it a minute ago, but VDI, our virtual desktop infrastructure, we increased capacity for that, and we saw a huge increase on it over the pandemic period. And we have that both internally for Windows, you can launch a full desktop, and Linux, and we make that available to every single colleague on Windows internally across the whole of the company. And the last thing, and something which I'm very proud of, and I know Pam's really proud of too, which is really, really cool, is our no-touch provisioning process. So we actually can directly ship a laptop, whether it be a Dell machine for Windows or an Apple Mac, directly from the supplier or reseller, directly to our colleague. And it requires no touch from us internally as an IT function. And obviously, during COVID and everyone working remotely and our offices are being closed, we've leveraged that very heavily, which is really cool. And I think, yeah, as I mentioned earlier on, just the big point here is that our foundation for this is Workspace ONE, and it's the journey we've been on for the last couple of years, as Pam touched on. And literally, when the COVID pandemic hit, we just literally switched to working this way. And there was no kind of switch in terms of the way people work. It was just literally pick up your laptop or access your machine, your home machine, and off you go. So the other thing, this is quite a simple slide really in terms of the stage, in terms of, you know, on its face, but you know, whatever work styles you have in your business or company or organization you work with, we had our own ones here. These are our 5 that we predominantly used internally. But during the pandemic, what was really clear is that every single person, no matter what your work style was, what your function was, quickly switched to being a remote worker. And one thing we kind of quickly switched on, we had a strategic initiative internally to be remote first. And obviously that was only accelerated by the pandemic hitting in March time. So I mentioned some of the pre-stuff, how we switched to working remote and our offices closing, and a bit of about what we did during the pandemic. So I mentioned about equipment being made available to people in terms of their home offices. And we're still doing that right now. We've shipped many peripherals out to our colleagues to allow them to continue working from home or wherever they may be. The other thing, we've been working very closely with HR and all of the teams internally, with our real estate colleagues, etc., in terms of how we can kind of extend that to just beyond IT equipment. So one thing we also did, we paid a stipend to every employee globally in the company. And that stipend was for anything they needed to work remotely. It could have been kit, but we mainly managed it through our IT processes. But it was mainly for things like furniture. If you needed a desk, me personally, I used it to help buy me a new chair because my back was killing me for the first few weeks of the pandemic. So whatever it might have been, that really helped people get their home office set up really quickly. And so the way they needed it. Quarter end, we made sure that quarter end was closed glitch free. We shipped UPS devices to those that needed them in those parts of the world. And we really made sure that people had everything they needed to carry on working, so there was no impact being out of the office. New hire onboarding is something really close to my heart personally. The new hire experience, I'm sure you've seen lots and lots of research recently over the last kind of 6 to 12 months from many different groups. But the new hire experience is becoming more and more important, especially from an IT and technology point of view. And many people are leaving companies because they're not having a good in-hire experience. So that was good for us, and it was a holy grail thing for us internally. And actually, we carried on doing that through the pandemic. So we've still been getting people new machines. If we can't get them new machines because of because we haven't been able to, because of office closures or border closures, we've been leveraging their own home machines, and they've been using our own VDI infrastructure to get onto our own virtual infrastructure to get onto that setup. And we've where we have tried to get machines to people where we can, we've pretty much got them on day one to them, which is a great achievement. It's great to the team internally. Training, we knew that people needed to up their skills. So many people might have worked remotely all the time, and they might have traveled all the time, like some of our sales colleagues internally, for instance. But some of our colleagues, maybe some of our kind of our R&D colleagues or some of our global services colleagues may have been kind of more office-based. So we kind of conducted regular webinar sessions like this one to people internally, And actually, we saw our highest adoption of people attending those webinars internally, which was amazing. And we kind of constantly evolutionized them. So we kind of gave them tips and tricks, basic ones at first, and we kind of brought that forward and kind of gave them more and more advanced sessions as we went through. And also ergonomics, right? So I mentioned earlier on about my chair and my back at the beginning of the pandemic, but it's not only just about the kit that you have, it's also about the way you sit and the way you are positioned. And obviously, we're more geared to that normally at work and at home, but maybe less so. And now we're working at home permanently or for a longer period. That became very important. Mergers and acquisitions. We had, you've seen the news, we had a bunch of acquisitions that VMware acquired this year. Myself, Pam, and our colleagues had to kind of onboard those companies. And actually, normally that would have been during a pandemic and where we couldn't get to the offices to meet them face to face and in person. It could have been a headache, but we've had a real big success with using Workspace ONE and onboarding them completely remotely. And actually, genuinely, that went without a hitch. We onboarded them seamlessly, and they were into the VMware family. And we got a hell of a lot of good feedback actually about it from them and saying, they joined well and it was a seamless transition. And then just a reminder, VMware on VMware is what we call these sessions, just in terms of us talking to you about what we do internally. I've mentioned how we leverage Horizon View earlier on and Workspace ONE, which is really cool. UBI is an acronym, but it means out of the box experience. So it's touching on the zero touch provisioning stuff I mentioned to you earlier on in terms of getting a machine to someone without touching it as IT, directly from the supplier, from the factory to our colleague. And virtual apps. We have a lot of virtual apps, and as I mentioned earlier on, we leverage them all the way through Workspace ONE. Everything's accessed through one space, through one link. So Pam, over to you.
Thanks, Dave. All right, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about how our support teams basically adapted during the pandemic. And I know this is a really busy slide, so I'm just going to basically highlight a couple of things that really kind of speak to the key message here. So if you look at the left-hand side of the screen, this is kind of a snapshot basically of what our team looked like in terms of how it was structured pre-pandemic. So our service desk team, which is based out of India, they were the folks that were primarily taking in tickets, calls, chats, what we, like a lot of times refer to as like remote support options. So if you were a road warrior, if you worked from a home office, you didn't work at a physical site, you would call up the service desk when you needed help. And then we had our on-site support folks. So you're based at a physical office, you need help, you would walk up to one of our tech bars if you were in one of our larger sites, or walk up to our on-site support staff at our smaller offices to get help. And pre-pandemic, as you can see here, like just from a pure ticket volume perspective, it was very close to 50-50. So the service desk was handling about half of the tickets and our on-site support teams were handling about half of the rest. And we had a really great customer satisfaction rate. We're pretty proud of our 95% pre-pandemic. And then just in terms of overall numbers of our support staff. So ticket volume is one thing, but about 77% of our overall teams globally, when you combine both of those teams, about 77% represented our on-site support staff. And about 23% represented the number of our service desk folks. And so then the pandemic hit. And of course, as Dave mentioned, pretty much over a weekend, just like everybody else globally, we saw all of our employees globally working from home. And so as you can imagine, and as I'm sure everyone else saw, we saw the need for providing remote support skyrocket. And so we had to adapt quickly to be able to deal with that volume. And so if you look more at the right-hand side of the screen, you can kind of see how, how we adapted and what the current situation looks like. So again, just from a pure ticket volume perspective, we're now seeing our service desk handling about 74% overall of the ticket volume and about 26% being handled by our on-site support teams. And, I mentioned sort of the ratio of on-site support staff versus service desk pre-pandemic. Now that we're in the pandemic, we've had to shift our team around. So a lot of our on-site support team members are now taking calls to be able to support that increased volume of tickets that the service desk is receiving. So now we're looking at, instead of pre-pandemic 77-23% split, we're now looking at about 57% of our team across the globe is providing what we still call on-site support, and about 43% are working the service desk. And you might ask, well, what are our on-site support folks actually doing? Because most everybody is working from home, but we have a good, sizable group of folks that we've deemed essential workers that are in the office, whether it's deploying equipment for new hires. We have peripheral vending machines that folks can still go in if they need something and actually, get a mouse or a keyboard or something by just swiping their badge and getting it from the vending machine. So our teams are stocking those machines on a regular basis. And then there's a lot of projects still going on, so although most folks are working from home, we're really trying to take the opportunity to do network upgrades, conference room upgrades, things like that, so that when our teams actually, more fully return to the office, we're in a good position to support that. So a lot of our on-site support teams are in the office actually doing that work. And the last thing I'll just mention about this slide, so the customer satisfaction rate, as you can see, pre-pandemic, it was about 95%, which again, we're really proud of. It's now 94%, so slight drop, but I would argue hardly noticeable. We're still getting really, really good feedback from our colleagues about the great work that the team is doing. So we're pretty proud of that. And so moving on. So this slide really kind of highlights some of the key metrics, if you will, that we've been keeping a really, really close eye on throughout the pandemic. I already talked a little bit about tickets, right? So keeping an eye on the ticket volume, making sure that wait times and things like that are not being negatively impacted. But the key call out here really is just the increase in volume. So we've seen almost a 30% increase in volume from a ticket perspective over the same time period compared to last year. So if you look at the, and I have something blocking my screen here. So March to August of 2020, basically a 30% increase over the same period last year. Second thing, we're keeping a really close eye on our backlog. So, the pandemic hit, and initially there was a lot of things we just kind of put aside. We said we can't do this right now because we're not in the office. Some of it was things like, one thing that certainly comes to mind for me was our new hires in the past. When they were physically based in an office, one of the tasks our team would do would be to go to the desk and set up their equipment, set up their monitor, make sure they have a keyboard and mouse, perhaps a docking station. So our teams would go do that. But obviously there's not a need for us to do that when people are not at the office. And so our backlog was really growing around those types of items. And so over time, we've come to realize that, and we're going to touch a little bit on this at the end of the presentation, but people are not going to be going back to the office in the numbers that they were before. And so some of these things we're actually never going to have to do. And so we've really started, putting a really, I would say, a close eye on those things to try to identify and reduce that backlog, because at some point obviously it will catch up with us. So we're looking at creative ways to deal with the things that we can, and trying really hard to identify the things that we're likely just never going to have to do. Peripherals is another thing we've been really keeping a close eye on, and Dave touched a little bit on this too, but it's really interesting whenever I'm talking to customers and they ask about the challenges we're dealing with. I often identify this as probably the biggest challenge we had to deal with when the pandemic hit. It wasn't about how to enable people to work remotely, because pretty much they already could. It was, how do we get things like monitors and keyboards and mice and the things that people need to be able to work from home? How do we get it to them? And at the same time, when everybody globally is all, everyone's needing the same items. So there was definitely supply chain issues, logistical issues. So again, I personally have called this out several times as probably our biggest headache, to be honest, which is really interesting, at least to me. A couple other things. So critical services, Workspace ONE, Dave mentioned, pretty critical to, I would say, our ability to enable remote work, really. But we did see a big increase in this, and part of it, I would say, was related to, folks were like everybody else, at home, there was a huge increase in the need for computers in general. People had kids doing homeschooling, all kinds of stuff. And so a big increase in the number of employees that are having to leverage personal equipment for various different reasons. So definitely from a capacity perspective, Workspace ONE logins definitely increased. VDI, like 80% increase over the same time period from last year. Like Dave, I don't know that I'm so much surprised, but definitely I think very impressive. There was initially some reluctance to leveraging VDI from some teams, like R&D is one I would call out, where they thought this is not going to work for us, and they had a list of reasons why. But when we really took a hard look at it, actually they could, and we've been pretty successful at enabling VDI for pretty much almost any scenario or need. So very, very proud of the team's ability to meet that need. We definitely increased our capacity around VDI to be able to handle that increase throughout the pandemic. And then the other thing, just around meetings, so collaboration in general, right? So there's a few different things here called out when it comes to collaboration. But we went from being in the office to everybody being remote. And so huge increases in not only the number of meetings, so you can see there a 90% increase over the same time period from 2019. The number of minutes up 154% over the same time period. Instant messaging and voice increases as well, actually 238% increase for instant messaging. Wow, that's crazy. But the key point here really is that all of the supporting infrastructure and services, right, to enable this, critical that those things obviously stay online, that the availability is as close to 100% as it can be. And also that we have resiliency plans in place so that if our primary conferencing platform goes down, we have an alternative. So, again, just things that we have really, really been keeping a close eye on throughout the pandemic to make sure that our colleagues can stay productive, continue to be able to collaborate with their peers. And so there's probably more here too that we could share, but these are some of the key things. And so moving on, it's interesting that, and I'm just going to build this slide out actually before I start talking. So, over the years, certainly, when you start talking about enabling a remote workforce, security has always been a concern, right? Especially, maybe not as much now as it was in the past, but it's always been a concern. And so I feel really lucky that we've got a great base. We've got these 3 pillars, which I'll touch on, to really support and enable a secure environment when you're working remotely. So starting off with the Workspace ONE platform, as Dave said, it enabled us to go pretty much remote over one weekend. The security really is almost invisible to our colleagues. So in the background, we could be pushing out security updates, security products for that matter, doing operating system upgrades, all kinds of things in the background with our colleagues hardly noticing at all, which is really awesome. And then we have, at the network level, we have NSX, which prior to the pandemic, there was actually a lot of work done over the last several years around micro-segmentation. And then, that's really enabled us, again, from an R&D perspective, right? Like think about an R&D person who needs to get access to development environments and things like that. When they are remote, could potentially be challenging, right? Both in terms of getting access, but also, what if something happens? What if there's a security breach of some kind? Having the network micro-segmented really helps us deal with that efficiently and effectively. And then from a endpoint security perspective, of course, Carbon Black is huge for us. So this was one of our big acquisitions, actually about a year ago now. I think it was last October. Time flies. But Carbon Black is really key for us. And it was interesting because we were actually going through a migration to Carbon Black on all of our endpoint devices when the pandemic hit. So we acquired Carbon Black back in October. We immediately started planning for how we're going to roll this out across the company. And we were just starting to do it when the pandemic hit. And the really cool thing about it was pretty seamless. And we were able to leverage to a large extent the Workspace ONE platform in order to make that seamless. So both the deployment capability within the Carbon Black application itself, but then also the deployment capabilities of Workspace ONE also. So those two combined together made it a really seamless experience. So for me, the key takeaway here, the thing that I love to share with customers is that this really takes security off the table. Like from a support perspective, my team, Dave's team, like our support teams, they almost don't really even have to think about security, which is really awesome. So this is really cool for us. And so moving on and talking just a little bit about the future of work, right? So, you know, we've all been in this pandemic mode now since, you know, early in the year, not sure when it's going to end. But I kind of touched on, you know, the fact that VMware as a company, and I know a lot of other companies as well, are really starting to plan for what is it going to look like post-pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, a lot of people had this feeling like, you know, remote work was challenging. They preferred maybe to be in the office for lots of different reasons, or felt like they had to be in the office for different reasons. And what this year has really shown us, despite all the challenges, the really cool thing that has come out of this year, I think, is the fact that we've all proven and demonstrated that we can work remotely and we can do it pretty successfully. So we're anticipating that post-pandemic, the numbers of folks that we're going to see going back into a physical office is going to be much less. And so what does that mean for our office spaces, right? So we're starting to look at, you know, the configuration basically of our collaboration spaces at the office, our traditional conference rooms, but also just the general space where, you know, in the past people would go in and have a cubicle, so lots of cubicles. Now what we're thinking is more likely what's going to happen is the office is going to become more of a place where, you know, you go to collaborate when you need to with folks, collaborate in the sense that, you know, a different type of collaboration than what you can do remotely. But it's not going to be so much a destination where you go in to work every day to like do heads down work and sit in a cubicle all day. It's going to be more of a collaboration type space. So we're looking at office configuration, and you know, I think it's definitely going to look a lot different when we go back. A lot more, you'll see a lot more hoteling type spaces, reservation systems for those spaces, so that if you do want to go into the office on a particular day, you don't have a designated desk anymore. So you want to make sure you have a place to work. So reservation systems to make that happen, and just generally a lot more collaboration spaces. So we're working really closely with our HR teams, our real estate or facilities teams as well, in order to identify and design those spaces to be optimal. And then, of course, you can't forget the home office, right? So great, we're gonna look at changes to the physical, our physical office spaces. But what about the home office? So we're expecting that the majority of our employees are actually going to work from a home office. So, Dave touched on his issue with his back, with his chair, right? Like, we don't want people having ergonomic issues. So how do we help them from a furniture perspective, but also on the tools and technology side? What might that look like? So our teams are working very hard to come up with recommendations around standards for monitor configuration, peripherals. We're really excited about our SD-WAN solution from our VeloCloud team. Not everybody has a great internet connection. So, we've had people running into challenges with internet. And so we've been able to leverage the SD-WAN solution to improve that experience for a lot of people, which is really exciting for us. So home office setup is going to be, it's a very big thing for us, actually. I would argue almost even bigger than the physical office spaces, because again, we will have the majority of employees working from home. And part of that too is, we've already started doing this, but from a collaboration perspective, it was a struggle for a lot of people that were working physically in the office before, used to being face-to-face with people, doing, whiteboarding and doing all those kinds of things. So we've been looking at improving the technology around remote collaboration tools and other things to be able to really support folks in a remote or distributed working environment, and leveraging those remote webinars that Dave mentioned too in order to train people on how to use those tools. So that's something that we're also very focused on. And then the last thing I'll touch on again, Dave mentioned, in terms of VMware on VMware, as VMware IT, obviously we use our product to, run our environments and support our environments. And there's a lot of different ways that we do that. Horizon View is huge, certainly with remote working and the struggles which we continue to see around supply chain. We're able to leverage virtual desktop to address a lot of the challenges that we have, which is awesome. Workspace ONE, again, as kind of the key and the backbone really to all of this, I feel. Already touched on SD-WAN. And then the other thing we're really excited about it is VMware Assist, which is relatively new. And if you haven't heard about it, you should go check it out. But basically think about BOMGAR as a remote support tool, and there's lots of different others out there. But VMware Assist basically could potentially replace those things for you. It leverages Workspace ONE, again, as the platform, so that any machine that's connected into Workspace ONE, our team can actually initiate a remote support session direct from Workspace ONE. So very integrated from a product perspective. And so let me kind of shift gears a little bit. This is the last slide actually, and we felt like we couldn't talk about this topic without really mentioning how it affects the ability to attract and retain the best talent, right? So again, what this year has really proven is most everybody can actually work remotely and do it successfully. And so this gives us the ability to hire anywhere. And so instead of recs being based, we want to hire someone. I live close to the Palo Alto office, and so it's very expensive to hire people in Palo Alto. So I've been able to, open up recs in other locations throughout the Americas, and it's really opened up the talent pool. So it's, we've been struggling for a long time on our D&I initiatives. This really, really helps from that perspective. So the ability to hire anywhere is huge. The onboarding experience also, which Dave talked about. So, that continues to be a really big focus. And in the past, it was oftentimes if you were a remote worker, your onboarding experience wasn't quite as great as somebody that was based in a physical office. And so, getting those as close to the same experience as possible is really important to us. And I feel like I don't want to say we're like there 100%, but like we've really come a long way throughout the pandemic with some of the work that we've done around onboarding experience, leveraging our no-touch provisioning. Being able to give people access to VMware systems on day one without IT having to get involved to reset passwords. So lots of things around onboarding that has really improved the experience. Virtual vending, we've called out in the middle here. So again, based on a physical office, it's usually pretty easy. If you need something, you just walk up to the tech bar, ask for what you need. You could go to the vending machine and get it yourself. It's pretty easy. But if you're a remote worker, not so much. So we're really looking at, how can we make that experience, again, as close to as the same experience that you would get in a physical office. And so we're working with vendors and partners to be able to enable them to easily order things and have them direct shipped to their home. So that's another big piece there. And then Dave's already touched on no-touch provisioning, certainly from a laptop perspective, but also, just in general applications as well. Leveraging Workspace ONE, you can get access to pretty much almost any application that you need, and it's pretty seamless. So, this is, I think, also really, really key to enabling a great experience for our colleagues. And then the last thing I'll just mention. So we do this thing within our team, which called a colleague roadmap. So this is something that we publish out to all VMware colleagues. And it's something that our team puts together. And what it actually is, it's really cool. So it's a roadmap which shows kind of all the things that are either currently in progress that we're working on as features, enhancements, things that we're working on to improve the colleague experience. But it also is somewhat of an aspirational list in terms of, it also includes things we're, I would say, dreaming about, like, hey, we really want to do this thing. Wouldn't it be cool if we could do this, but maybe we haven't started working on it yet. We don't even know if it's possible, but you can go there and you can see the things that we're thinking about doing. And you can, click through and get some additional details on it. We love to hear people's ideas as well. So it's really cool when, people get inspired by, what they see when they look at the colleague roadmap. So all of this basically, speaks to really driving an end-to-end experience that is as best as it can be for our colleagues, regardless of where they are, whether they're in an office, whether they're working from a home office, whether they're on the road. And we really believe that all of this really supports, again, attracting and retaining the best talent. At the end of the day, no one wants to work at a company where it's hard to get their job done, where there's a lot of friction. So we feel like all of these things really help to support a great experience. And with that, we're going to open it up for some questions.